Hello, good evening, and welcome to the Health and Medicine Information session for the Churchill Fellowships for 2025. We'll just give it a moment while we wait for people to join. My name is Tom Nightingale. I work for the Churchill Trust, which administers Churchill Fellowships. I look after media and marketing at the Trust. We'll just give it a couple more moments while we wait for people to come in. Get started in a moment or two. While we're waiting, if you want to take a look at the Trust website, we have plenty of questions and answers there, information that people have asked in these sessions in previous years. So if you're looking for that, it's churchilltrust.com.au, and there's a prominent link to FAQs there. Okay, we're just about to hit triple figures for people who are here, so that's probably a good time to start. As I said a little earlier, my name's Tom Nightingale. I'm the Media and Marketing Manager at the Churchill Trust, which administers Churchill Fellowships. And thank you everyone for coming along to this information session that's aimed at people in the health and medicine sectors. I want to acknowledge that I'm coming from Ngunnawal and Ngambri country this evening, which is a place where knowledge has been shared for tens of thousands of years. And I want to acknowledge and pay respect to elders of the past and the present, and extend that respect to all the elders of various traditional countries across Australia. As far as this evening's session goes, we have closed captions available for those who would benefit from it. It comes on about a 7-second delay, and it's easily accessible by clicking a button at the bottom of the webinar. This meeting's being recorded, and a copy of the recording will go to everyone who registered via email in the next day or so. So you're welcome to share that with others. There's also copies of the recording that go on the YouTube channel of the Churchill Trust. As far as the format for tonight, we have an hour, and we aim for about the first half an hour to be presentations, and then the second half of it to be answering some questions that you have. Tonight you'll hear from Christine Dacey, who's the CEO of the Churchill Trust, and she can tell you what you want and need to know about fellowships themselves. And then we have two Churchill Fellows joining us who each have different stories, but still hopefully really kind of relevant and interesting stories for you to hear about from them, about the application, about the travel itself, about what they studied, and about what it meant when they came back. So we'll hear from those two as well. You can also pop questions in the Q&A box at any time. So we'll get to those in the back half of the program, but feel welcome to put them in. Okay, so we will, I'll throw to Christine Dacey in a moment. Christine is the CEO of the Trust, as I mentioned, and she joined very late last year. Christine's background is in the Commonwealth Public Service, where she was a kind of senior leader for a couple of decades, and she worked in several different parts of the Commonwealth, but across aviation, infrastructure, immigration, education, youth affairs, superannuation. So she's covered a lot of areas that are relevant for what we all experience. But Christine, I'll hand it over to you. Take it away.
Thanks, Tom. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I would like to associate myself with the acknowledgement of country that Tom provided on behalf of the Trust, and welcome you all here. I would also like to be very clear that the Trust is committed to First Nations participations in our fellowships. So as Tom said, this session really is about giving you the information you need. We find that a lot of people have quite broad questions that relate to almost everyone who will be joining us. And so we actually try and focus on those rather than very specific ones. If you have very specific ones about you and your work or your interest, we tend to ask you to follow up by reading the FAQs or reaching out to us separately. So I've got a few slides. I promise not to send you completely crazy with too many slides. And I guess the first of which is, I'm just trying to find my slideshow. The first of which is remembering Sir Winston. And my apologies, folks, this is just playing up a little bit. and what the fellowship's all about. And so he was a leader who believed deeply in the power of public service and the capacity of individuals to create change. When he passed away some 60 years ago in 1965, Australia launched a national fundraising campaign in his honour through the idea being to create a living legacy. Of course, the fellowships are the result of that. From the fundraising, it was one of the largest public fundraising efforts in our history, and it raised over £2 million, so much so that the banks at that time had to stay open on a Sunday. And it's a really extraordinary effort when you look back and reflect on that. And that generosity continues today through the Churchill Fellowships. And through that, we have been able to assist many fellows basically undertake this grand adventure. So I will just stick to some of the nuts and bolts then about what is a fellowship. It's a unique and prestigious and life-changing opportunity, which is open to Australians and permanent residents from all backgrounds. I want to be clear about that. You don't have to have a degree. You don't have to have come through any particular pathway. It isn't an academic scholarship, and we encourage you not to think of it like that. It's not a funding grant. We encourage you to think very broadly about it. It's about your vision and your journey of learning and contribution. Fellows travel overseas for between 4 and 8 weeks to learn new skills, observe best practice, and build networks that benefit their industry or communities back in Australia. The topics are incredibly broad-ranging, and there really are no limits. Each fellowship is completely tailored to an individual's passion and purpose. We really also emphasise sort of at the back end of the fellowship what it gives you, which is access to decision makers and people of influence that you might not otherwise have had the opportunity to meet. And of course, should you be successful, you would join the alumni that we have, which we're really proud of. So that's an incredible kind of jewel in the crown as well. And, you know, since we started this, we've helped 4,800 Australians to undertake this incredible opportunity. So look, in terms of applying for the fellowship, to be eligible to apply, you have to be a citizen or a permanent resident. You have to be aged 18 or over, and there's no upper age limit. So those are kind of the absolute baseline criteria. I would say if you have a disability or you live remotely, we do offer additional travel support, including virtual and hybrid options or domestic travel in very, very specific circumstances. And more information is available about that on our website. But I will say it is first and foremost about travel out of Australia. What sort of projects? It's an individual project. It's not a team project. However, we do welcome joint applications between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians if the project is focused on First Nations issues. Your project does have to be self-contained, and you have to be able to show a benefit for the Australian community. Equally, you need to be able to show that the topic has been fully explored within Australia first, because that's the whole point about going overseas and looking at other examples and seeing what we could bring back. A couple of really basic tips for your application. It's a really competitive process. We get over 1,000 applications each year for about 100 fellowships. So it really is important to do everything you can to make your projects stand out. Some of the things that we're looking for are things like, what's the need? Why is this project important now? What are the benefits? How does it help others? Who will it help and how will it help them? An itinerary, you need to give us a really clear sense of where you want to go, who you want to meet with, you know, destinations, purposes. We get asked quite a bit, how firm does that itinerary need to be when you put your application in? The answer is clear enough to give us a sense that you're going to, you know, Venezuela, Mexico and Canada, and not then turning around and saying, oh, I want to go to South Korea as well. So, but we do understand that these things get refined. So we're asking you to, at a very top level, have an itinerary that makes sense and that you will stick to, because of course that will help us determine the value of the fellowship. We say to people, you need to be telling us why you should be doing this, what makes you the right person to deliver on this idea. Please be clear, be concise, and be specific. Don't use jargon, and focus on how your project can create meaningful change. Those are our kind of top tips. We are, as Tom said, going to launch into questions and answers after we've heard from Anna and Lindsay, but just getting out in front of that a little bit, we get asked all the time, how much is a fellowship worth? And the answer is it's tailored to your project, but on average, it's about $35,000. And most, in fact, all fellows are telling us that that is sufficient and that they find that that is sufficient to cover their fellowship. What expenses do we cover? Airfares, travel, accommodation, meals, and other fees that are approved with your application. So it is important to include in your application what those fees will be. We can't keep repcharging things as applications and itineraries change. What section do I apply in? People are very keen to understand, if I tick a medical box, does that rule me out of an education box? Does that rule me out of a social services box? The answer is no. You tick the box and the stream and the theme that you think is most applicable. But we have people who are assessing the applications who will do some sifting, and where there are overlaps and what have you, they will make sure that it gets triaged into the right selection areas. And the other question we get asked a lot is about, well, how do I juggle work and family? And the answer is you really have to have a good think about this. Talk to your boss, talk to your partner, work out, can I juggle leave? What is this going to look like professionally? Will I have time? And I think, again, our fellows will have some good advice for you on that. I guess I'll stop talking now, but remember that my team and I are here to help, so please don't hesitate to reach out with questions. And as I say, there's quite a lot of good detail on our FAQs and on our website. Thanks and good luck, and back to you, Tom.
Thanks, CD. We're about to hear from our first speaker, Anna Hilyard, shortly. But before we do, I just want to take a moment to mention one of our sponsors. So we have General Fellowships, and we also have a number of sponsorships which are for very particular categories. And I'll share a few of those tonight. But the first I wanted to let you know about is it's the Les Fleming Churchill Fellowship for Advancements in Oncology and Cancer Research. Now, this was established in memory of the late Les Fleming, who died of cancer, and he was the father of a guy called Craig Fleming, who was a 1997 Churchill Fellow. Craig made provision in his will for a perpetual Churchill Fellowship to be awarded in memory of his father, and he passed away about 20 odd years ago, aged 44. So there's a really poignant story there, and that kind of helps more and more fellowships every year happen with amazing results that come from that. But I want to introduce you to our first featured speaker now. Anna is a 2017 Churchill Fellow specialising in digital health. She works at Perth Children's Hospital, and she has a particular focus on supporting young people experiencing chronic disabling pain and their families. So for Anna's fellowship, she travelled to the USA, Canada, Sweden and the UK to investigate digital paediatric pain treatment. And just briefly, in 2022, she collaborated with Boston Children's Hospital and Harvard University to deliver an evidence-based interdisciplinary pain intervention to WA families in their own homes via telehealth. So Anna, over to you.
Thank you, Tom. So yes, I'm speaking from the land of the Noongar people over here in Perth, and I'd just like to acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging. So as Tom said, I was a 27 Churchill Fellow. At the time, I was working at Perth Children's Hospital as the program coordinator of the complex pain service, which means we looked after kids all over the state who had long-term disabling pain for various reasons, various pathologies. And these kids were very, very impacted by their pain. Often they were very physically limited. Many were in wheelchairs. Many weren't able to go to school for years at a time. They couldn't sleep. They couldn't socialize. Their social development was impacted. And we were able to develop a really good intervention that helped these kids and helped their parents, because the parents were also very, very impacted by their child's condition. They were usually very distressed. So we had an intervention that was fairly complex. It was physio, psych, OT, and teaching working together to do a psychological intervention. So it was a cognitive behavioral intervention that was based on a neuroscience foundation, which basically means we taught them how their brains work to give them motivation to use these evidence-based CBT techniques. So that's all a bit of a mouthful, I know, but essentially we had this effective intervention, but it was really hard to get it out into the community because WA is massive. 2.5 million square kilometres, but it's very sparsely populated. So we don't have the hubs of tertiary medical input that they have in, say, Queensland. So we had an issue with geographic challenges. We also had an issue with limited number of staff from both a funding and also skill point of view. So I looked around at what was available in Australia, and essentially elsewhere in Australia, there was an adult digital pain program that was very, very effective. And I worked with a team there, but they were not able to help me because the intervention for kids is very different to the intervention for adults. And doing a remote delivered pain intervention is very different to remotely delivering a consult for, whether it be a medical consult or a physio consult, where you sit down and talk to someone and maybe prescribe a few exercises or medication. That's very different to actually doing a psychological intervention, pain intervention. So I did my application and I was absolutely delighted to be awarded a fellowship in 2017. And I went to 7 centres of excellence in the US, Canada, Sweden, and the UK. And I had an absolutely amazing time. The fellowship opened so many doors. I decided, I got all this encouragement from the fellowship, to aim big, make sure your project is ambitious. And so I basically approached all the high flyers in the world in this area who knew anything about digital health for kids with chronic pain. And not one of them declined my request. So I was pretty happy about that. So basically, when I came back from my fellowship, you have to write up your report, which, to be honest with you, if you've had this high of the travel, then you come back to Earth and you have to do your report. And then you get down to the work of the fellowship, really, which is trying to put your project in action. So I was lucky to have a lot of support from the CEO of the hospital that I worked at. And I applied for lots of funding to try and get up what I considered from my travels to be the best option, which was going to be an app which would provide information to families, to the kids and the parents, but then also have telehealth support available as well in a structured way. But to do that, building apps, anybody who's built an app before knows it's very expensive, and I put a lot of work into applications to get funding, but I wasn't going anywhere. So I decided to have a rethink, and I decided what would be best to do would be to not try to reinvent the wheel. So I contacted Boston Children's Hospital and negotiated being able to deliver their program. They run a very good telehealth program. Negotiated being able to run their program out of Perth Children's Hospital. So it took a long time to negotiate the license, but we did it. And in 2022, we launched our program, 2021. And it was fantastic because obviously during COVID, we could keep running our pain programs when our colleagues in other states weren't able to do that, because we can deliver it right into the patient's home or into the parent's workplace as required. So I'm quickly running out of time, so I'm just going to give you a couple of takeaway messages for you thinking about your projects. Firstly, think about the impact that your project can have on the community. Think about it. Convey that during your application, and when you get back, make sure you keep thinking about the impact. How are you going to get this working to improve the lives of Australians? Think big. Don't be limited by imposter syndrome. We all feel imposter syndrome at times, so think big. The Churchill Fellowship opens a lot of doors, and there's a lot of support. Their office are fantastic. If you have any issues or problems, they're there to support you. And finally, when you return and you're trying to actually get your project into reality, be a bit flexible, persevere, and keep going until you get your project completed, because it is very, very rewarding process. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Anna. That was really great to hear from you, and I feel that plenty of people will want to hear more from you, and my message would be, don't worry, you will get the chance to hear more from Anna in the Q&A. Okay, so I'll throw to our next speaker, Lindsay Bent, in a moment or two, but just firstly, before I do, I'd want to let you know about a new sponsored fellowship that we're offering for the first time this year, actually. So this is the Julie Stone Churchill Fellowship to investigate infant mental health. Julie was the recipient of a Churchill Fellowship in 2001, which was investigating different therapeutic frameworks for working with families where infants are at high risk of impaired emotional and social development. Now, Julie has kind of spoken about the fact that the inspiration and the encouragement she gained as a Churchill Fellow has kind of remained with her as a guiding light for the rest of her working life, and she has quite a prominent and kind of very, very widely respected career. So Julie and her husband Peter are now offering or hoping that this fellowship will kind of lead to inspiring and encouraging other mental health, infant mental health practitioners in their work. So we wanted to let you know about that. And of course, there are more and more sponsored Churchill Fellowships than that. So please have a look at the Churchill Trust website if you'd like to have a look at exactly what different particular categories there are for fellowships. But I want to introduce you now to Lindsay Bent. Lindsay is an intensive care paramedic with Ambulance Victoria. He's been with them for 33 years, and in that time he's led to the introduction of motorcycle paramedics. He's researched alternative telephone triage algorithms. He was the operational lead for the development and the introduction of Australia's first mobile stroke ambulance. And he has a particular passion to strengthen and improve the care that ambulance services can provide to people who live with dementia. So in 2022, Lindsay was awarded the Sir William Kilpatrick Churchill Fellowship, another sponsored fellowship. And in this case, it was to review the establishment and the effectiveness of dementia-friendly ambulances and dementia planning. So Lindsay, thank you for being here, and over to you.
Thanks so much. Hi, everyone. Really excited to be here today to talk about, give you a brief blurb on my fellowship, and also give you a few tips and tricks with regards to what you need to consider when you're submitting your application and what that might look like. So I'm sharing my screen with you now, just a really quick PowerPoint, just to highlight a few things. Dementia-friendly ambulance trusts. I travelled to the UK to have a look at what the NHS, specifically in the ambulance industry, as that's my area of expertise, but also within health services, within public bodies, within support groups, within Dementia UK, etc., what they're doing to make organisations and healthcare providers dementia friendly. Here, certainly in Victoria, in the frontline workforce, frontline responder workforce, we don't have specific targeted training for people living with dementia, and given the rise in the numbers that we're expecting in the near future, that is a real key issue. There's a couple of happy snaps from my Churchill Fellowship and some of my travels, taking part in the virtual reality, some meetings there with Alzheimer's UK, some support groups, as I say. What was really good is one of the people that that looked after me in one particular spot in the northwest of England was actually a Churchill Fellow themselves. So they really understood what I was going through, what I needed to achieve, and they were in an immense amount of support, which was lovely. With regards to, we were talking just earlier about imposter syndrome. Get that out of your head and take the leap. Why? I kind of had that too going into this. Why me? What can I do? What's change am I going to affect from all of this? But a couple of dot points there that I've popped on the slide, which is what's happened since I've been back. My report has been distributed across the country and across New Zealand to the various ambulance jurisdictions there for their consideration with regards to their practice and training. My research has been published within the Council of Ambulance Authorities magazine and the Australian Journal of Dementia Care. I presented at a number of conferences last year, the National Dementia Conference and the Australian Dementia Conference. I've collaborated really closely and formed some great links in with Dementia Australia and Dementia Training Australia with regards to how we can start to create some targeted training for the frontline workforce and what that might look like. We're looking to create that new program, as I say. There's been a lot of political interest, and I've had a lot of discussions and liaisons with members of parliament, etc., in this space about how we can all collaborate to effect some change and provide targeted care, and cause the organisation, Ambulance Victoria, to have a bit of a rethink in this space and what direction we should be thinking about. Now, this is where the rubber hits the road for you in terms of some takeaways. There is impact, as we've discussed earlier, there is impact to you personally. So you need to consider how you're going to manage your work life, your personal life, and your fellowship, because there's a lot going on concurrently. So something to consider. When you're thinking about your topic, select something that's fresh, that's relevant, has community impacts, big benefits, something that hasn't ordinarily or previously been funded for, and that's something we haven't already looked at, so something new. Think about, you're going to be asked in your interview, why do you need to go overseas? So what is it there that you need to physically go and be a part of, as opposed to just doing your research online or doing emails or Zoom meetings or whatever you need to do? Why do you need to go overseas? Who have you already engaged with? So who have you spoken to? What have been the discussions? What have you got sorted out? What's the plan? Where do you think this will go? So have a really good structure as to what you think this is going to look like if it is approved. Why you? Why not somebody else? Why is it specifically you that needs to undertake this, and why are you the person to take on that role? And finally, the work doesn't stop after you complete your report. Writing your report is a big task, but it's the work that happens after that as well to consider. And with that, I'll finish it up and open it up to any questions. And I've just popped down there a little a quote: "The freedom to explore, the wisdom of travel, and open-mindedness being available to all." Thanks so much, Tom.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. And yes, that quote is a bit of a truism that really informs our work every day at the Trust as we administer the fellowships, and it's something that we hope informs and is kind of just underpinning everything about what a fellowship really is. We will move to Q&A shortly, so please pop those questions in the Q&A section. Just before we do, I wanted to take a moment, because I don't know if anyone here is either working at Royal North Shore now or perhaps has in the past, but there's a story that relates to there that I want to share, because it's I think it's relevant. So there was a young physician in the 60s at Royal North Shore named Dr. John Yeo, who spoke at the time about the appeal of healthcare and the calling of healthcare for him being around tragedies and accidents and injuries, as well as the joy of things like delivering a baby. And that's something that I think many people here would kind of relate to. Now, he was awarded a Churchill Fellowship in the Trust's second ever application round in 1967. Back at that time, there was an increase in spinal injuries, and he was passionately concerned about this and wanted to do something about it. So he did it as Churchill Fellowship to study the advances in treatment internationally for paraplegics and rehabilitation methods. He had a long, illustrious career. There may well be people here who worked with him or engaged with him in some capacity. He was awarded an Officer of the Order of Australia. He is a life membership of the Churchill Trust due to his ongoing involvement with the Churchill Trust and contributing back after his fellowship. And he decided to sponsor fellowship opportunities for others. So following a generous donation, we've got the Dr. John and Mrs. Joy Yeo Churchill Fellowship, which is supporting research that improves understanding of changing cellular pathology following spinal cord injury within 48 hours of the initial impact. And just quickly, to be considered for this particular fellowship, applicants must be recognised by their colleagues as specialists in this field. So there's something underpinning that, which is that all these fellowships are a substantial amount of money, and it's a real investment in you as a person and the impact that you can have. So that's something we want you to bear in mind as you're applying, as you're going through the process, as you're trying to work out what does this mean for you. We'll go to Q&As now, and Christine, I think the first one's probably one for you. The question is, will we require ethics approval if we're conducting interviews? Now, interviews are a pretty integral part of any fellowship. So, yeah, Christine, what can you share with us about that?
I wish I knew, Tom. So I haven't done the medical ones before. So can we take that one on notice and get some advice back to the person?
Absolutely. And wherever there are questions that we need to take on notice, what we'll do is update them on the Trust website and let people who've registered for this know via email. Okay. This one's one that I'd like Anna and Lindsay both to kind of speak to. The question is, how do you answer the question, why you? Anna, maybe you kick us off.
Well, I suppose most people who are applying for a Churchill Fellowship are particularly passionate about some particular area. I mean, that's to be interested in, you know, applying for it and going through the whole process and then coming back and doing a project. It has to be something that you're really into. It can't just be something, oh, I'm interested in whatever today. So you're likely to have some interest there already and some passion for it. So I suppose it's about looking at what then you can offer. What can you offer to really the people of Australia to take your passion and add the knowledge that you can gain during a fellowship to actually bring something back that will help people here in Australia.
And similarly, Tom, I think, yeah, look, really good points. For me, again, I talked about the passion. I actually incorporated some of the characteristics of Winston Churchill in my determination, my focus, my strong desire about getting some of these programs across the line. I've been involved in a lot of change within the organisation in the clinical space, and that is my role in clinical. And so that was for me, having had history of affecting change within the organisation in the clinical space. This was the opportunity. This is why it needs to be me, because of these points of getting the program happening and my ability to do that. And that really helped, I found.
Can I just add something there, Tom? That one thing to I suppose be clear about in your application is if you are in a position to directly, through your job, for example, to be able to directly deliver the project after you come back, fantastic. Make sure that is very clear in your application. But you don't necessarily have to be at a management level, or, you know, like I was managing a Say-Wise service, which I could explain that very easily. But some of my fellows on the same year were not at that level. They were actually doing just essentially a clinical role, but they could explain very clearly how they would take the knowledge from a fellowship and apply that in their clinical role, and what they would then do with it to duplicate it and to expand on it and so forth.
And just extending that point a bit further, and I think a couple of us have touched on it, but it really is worth saying, have a good chat with your employer, because this is a really big undertaking, you know, getting ready to go, then being out of the workforce while you're doing it. And one question we got in another one of these was, can I work remotely while I'm doing the fellowship? And the answer is no. You know, this is an all-in moment. And then when you come back and have to write your report, that will also take up your time. So we really encourage people to think about, you know, having that good conversation with their employer early.
Christine, just to that point, we've got a question here that's probably something that's relevant for some people. When planning itineraries and accommodation, is it possible to book to accommodate family if young children and partner are spending time on the travel, or pay the difference to accommodate family? So I suppose the broader point there is, how should people think about an application for a fellowship when they do have families and commitments and that kind of thing? What would our advice be to people who are considering what that means in their professional and their personal lives?
Look, we've had fellows take family and at their cost. I guess I again just go back to, this is pretty intense, and Anna and Lindsay, you know, interested in your perspectives here. I've had some fellows say it made the fellowship, and I've had some say it really made it harder. It is not a holiday, and you know, our experience is people try and cram an awful lot into their itineraries, and things can get quite tricky. So it's within the rules, but the spirit of the fellowship is that this is, you know, for you. Anna, Lindsay, you might want to add something or not.
I'm happy to speak to that. I attended my first Churchill information session like this when my kids were teenagers, school age. And I was really passionate about what I wanted to do, but I came away from it thinking maybe a bit later. And I actually just kept thinking about, when is it going to be ready for me? And for me, I decided not to do it until my kids were adults, essentially. I think they were possibly still at home, but didn't need me, as much because they were young adults at uni and so forth. I would just, what Christine says about it being very intense, that is absolutely correct. To get the most from your fellowship is like a real all-consuming thing. You'll go to visit people and they will come up with all these, oh, why don't you come for lunch here? Why don't you do this? Come for drinks tonight. And if you've got sort of family commitments, if you've got young kids with you, it would make it harder. So just think long and hard about and make sure that your partner is aware that you're going to be. My partner traveled with me, which was fantastic because it was more it was a support because we didn't have kids with us. He was there as a support. But if we had little kids, it would have been a very different story, I think.
Yeah, really good feedback. Great idea, but no. What I found was my days often would start early and would finish late. What I found that it was quite fatiguing at times with some of the activities I was undertaking. What I found that after I came back at the end of the day and on the couple of days that I gave myself off, I actually started my report, or I was doing a lot of note taking from the day and reflecting on my experiences and what I'd learnt that day. There were no distractions from me to do that. So I just found I was able to completely apply and absorb myself into the whole process without that distraction. Look, it'd be great if we could, but let's be honest, we're here for a purpose to do something proper in this space. So let's remain focused.
Thank you, Lindsay. There's a question I'd like to pick up on that goes to that point. But just firstly, there's a question here around, is there somewhere to access what reports look like? Reports from Churchill Fellows who finished their travel. There's almost every fellowship who's completed a report. Well, all of them are published on the Churchill Trust website. So I encourage you, again, go to the website, search for a project or fellow that maybe is in your area, or your topic, and read the report. That will paint a picture for you of what it looks like, how it works. Now, to pick up on the previous point we were just discussing around commitments and what travel is actually like, those reports have itineraries, and those itineraries themselves paint a picture. For me on staff, there are times where I'll pick up a report because we're working with it. Honestly, sometimes you feel exhausted just reading an itinerary. It is a really intense period of travel and learning and study. And I encourage everyone here just to have a look on the website and read things that are relevant for you and your area, because you will learn something from that. There's another question here that I think Anna and Lindsay, would be great to hear from you on, and it's around how you balance, again, a fellowship with your professional commitments. So what leave did you each take, and how did you manage that part of this whole process? Anna, maybe you kick us off.
Well, okay, so I was lucky enough to get part of my travel as I used annual leave for some of it, and they gave me some special leave for a couple of weeks of it. So I was sort of funded for 3/4 of my travel. While you're away, obviously, depending on what job you've got, you've got to get somebody to take over your role or whatever it is that you're doing. I was in the very when I planned my travel, we were going to have been Perth Children's Hospital actually moved venues a couple of years ago, and we were meant to be like 1 year into the new site when my travel was meant to happen, but unfortunately it was all delayed. So unfortunately, my travel coincided with shifting hospitals, which is a pretty massive task. So my team were filling in for me, plus moving all of the department over to the new hospital. So I came back from my project really enthusiastic and wanting to chat to people about all these new ideas that I had, and everybody else was just, oh, thank God you're back, So I think what's really important when you are going away, considerations for your work, is to, as Christine said, you've got to liaise with your employer, but you've also got to liaise with your team, the team around you that you're going to be taking up the slack while you're away. But also the team that you maybe want to take on a journey with you after you get back to do your project. And just be very considerate of their feelings that they may not be as excited about it as you are to start with. You have to paint the vision for them.
Yeah, agreed. As Christine said, look, engagement and support of your employer is so crucial. It really, really is. So have those discussions early and make it really clear what you need to do and how you'll get that support. I was lucky enough to do a mix of my own personal leave accruals and some funded time off as well to undertake this project. My chief executive at the time saw the incredible value that my project had on the broader organisation and on our delivery of best care, and was happy to invest in me in doing that activity.
Thank you, Lindsay. CD, the next one's one I think that you'd be good for you. It's a question around referees and professional referees in particular. What makes the right professional referee? Is it someone who needs to have a kind of profile, or is it someone who you work more closely with? What is it that's going to be useful for people to know about who they choose as their professional referee?
Look, I think the reality is it's the person who can best talk to what you're trying to achieve, right? So profile, lovely to have, not critical. We want people who, when we get to a certain point in, this really competitive process, if we say to them, really, what's Anna going to do? What does this look like? What's her personal characteristics? Does she have the resilience and kind of, drive to get this through? That's my advice. And, make sure that they understand what it is that you're trying to achieve, because, that will give your proposal or application the best shot at success. I can see Anna slightly nodding, so I'm assuming that that's reasonable advice.
Great. Next question kind of follows on from that, in that it's also about the application process. When people are putting together a kind of planned itinerary of what they want to study, where they want to go, why they want to go to that particular location, how much detail is needed in the application stage? Do people need to be really specific about which organisation, which person? Do they need to have got a pre-agreement from those particular people or organisations that they will make time for the applicant? Like, what's the level of detail that people need when they're applying?
Look, to help us and the panel understand what you're actually proposing to study, we need to know where you're going, who you're going to be talking to. And by who, I mean like organisationally, right? And I don't mean I'm going to meet with Tom Natigal and no one else, because as both Anna and Lindsay said, things happen organically while you're travelling. But what we can't have is people going, oh, I'm thinking that I might go to South America, but, there's also some really interesting people in Russia. So we just, that's not sufficient. So we need, a sensible outline of an itinerary. Is it 4 countries? Is it 8 countries? Is it, 4 weeks? Is it 6 weeks? And here are the organisations, and in some cases individuals that I've already got contacts with, and they link directly to my proposal X, Y, and Z. But, we know, and both our speakers have talked about how when you're there, they'll go, oh, no, you really ought to come and, talk to Fred over here. So that's the sort of level of detail. And we need to know, not the least of which, so that we've got some idea of how long you're going for and what the cost will be. And actually, Tom, I saw one other question was, can I stagger the travel across the year? And the answer is no. It's all in one hit, and that is for us managing the costs. We manage the costs on behalf of the whole cohort, and so every year, in order to fund 100 fellows, we have to make some parameters that make sense.
Thank you. And we've also got a couple of questions about the video part of the application process. So for those who aren't aware, as part of the application, you're asked to upload a 60-second video that you've recorded yourself, and you can't pre-record it. You do it kind of, you do it in one hit as part when you're doing the application form. The one thing I'd like you to know is that we do offer some guidance for that to help you understand what that looks like, what we're looking for. The reason it's there is that sometimes a written application is great, but there's something you can get from someone talking in their own words that you just can't get from a written application, which is, part of why we run these sessions to help people understand fellowships themselves. So we offer some guidance in advance of that to help people. It's not a slide deck, it's a presentation as part of your application. There's a couple of other questions around how a fellowship interacts with academia. Some health medical professionals will have a kind of role with academic institutions, with study. Christine, what's our advice to people around what a fellowship is and is not with respect to someone who's also pursuing, academic study?
I mean, I guess the key thing is this is not part of a PhD. It is not part of your university degree. It's its own thing. And it's got its own badging, funding source, history, background, and life beyond, and we are very protective of that at the Trust. That said, it's a bit like a Venn diagram, right? At some point, there's bound to be some overlap. And it's not about, I guess, seeking permission is how I would put it. But I think you'd want a level of congruence that makes sense. And you wouldn't want to be doing anything that was not, I guess, justifiable to an interested third party who might be an ethics committee. I guess that's my best go at that answer. But we stand alone.
Thanks.
Can I say something on that?
Yep.
Because I actually was doing my PhD when I applied for my fellowship, and it was a project about pediatric chronic pain, but it was not about digital health. And so they did ask me lots of questions about that in the interview, and because it was a separate project, I think I was awarded the fellowship. But what's really important is that in the same way you get permission from your employer to be out of work for however many weeks you're going to be away, you have to be out of study as well. You have to have leave allocated by the university. You can't think that you're going to keep writing a bit in the evening of your papers or whatever, because the Churchill Fellowship is all consuming, like we've discussed before. So if you are doing a higher degree, I would really encourage you to get special leave from your university, so you have time out.
Thank you, Anna. Getting a couple more questions about referees. Lindsay and Anna, I'd love to hear both your thoughts on that, if you can cast your mind back to your journey in the application process. Who did you each select to be, personal and professional referees? How did you come to that point? It seems like people want some guidance on just who's the right referee to give their application the best chance of succeeding.
Yeah, it's a really good question. It has to be relevant, really, for what you're trying to achieve. So organisational referees are great to the point where they can comment on you professionally, and they can comment on the topic that you're researching and why it's important, why there's a gap, why this needs to be looked at. So I found there was great value from using organisational referees in that space that could lend commentary to both of those particular aspects, really. Personal stuff, yeah, it's good to talk about some personal attributes that you have, but if you can sum up the ability of your professional character and how you can conduct this research and the organisational need and why it's a priority, then that's a really good approach, I think.
I actually had, for my professional reference, I provided my medical head of department, and I did that. I thought about it very strategically, and I thought, well, he is going to be the person that can talk to how I might be able to roll out the project when I get back from my fellowship travels. So even some people think, oh, I've got to get somebody really famous and really, really high up on the ladder. But I think, like Christine said before, somebody who can talk to your project is really good to select. And for my personal reference, I got I actually went with a pain specialist that I'd known, that worked with for a long time. So it was a crossover between professional, knew me professionally, and sort of just knew me in that time. So he was also able to talk to the project a bit as well. So I suppose I was fairly strategic in trying to pick people who could understand the project and knew how to answer the questions, I suppose, about my suitability for the project.
Thank you, Anna. There's a question here around if people have a long history of volunteering in a particular field and want to pursue a project in that rather than a work-related, will that be considered, by the Churchill Trust? Well, just to that quickly, there's a fellow by the name of Amanda Wilson who's from Tasmania. She's not health or medical sectors. She's a farmer by trade, but she volunteers in adult literacy. So she's recently done her fellowship in that particular field in best practice teaching literacy to adults. Because she has a kind of substantive track record volunteering in that field. So again, that paints a few pictures there. One of them is that the Churchill Fellowships really are, every idea will be considered. And another key point from that is that, if you've got a connection to something, if you've got a kind of established network and positioning that allows you to have an impact if you were to do the study, then that's something that will be factored into an application. Next question that I'd like to go to, though, Lindsay and Anna, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one. It's a great question. If you have physical challenges that mean that you need to pace yourself, can you go at your pace, or do you have to cram everything in and bust yourself? It's a great question because it goes to how much you push yourself versus how much you kind of manage, I suppose, what you need to manage. Lindsay, maybe we hear from you first, but I'd love to hear how you tried to strike that balance, because I imagine it's not easy.
Yeah, it's probably one of the dot points I put in my brief PowerPoint about you need to manage yourself. You need to manage everything, and this is part of it. So your program has to be fit for purpose to achieve what you want it to achieve, but it also has to be achievable. So SMART goals, clear, measurable, achievable. There is no point pushing yourself to the point where you can't achieve what you set out to achieve, because it's not going to be as successful as what it needs to be. So actually taking into consideration what needs to be done versus what you can do and deliver, it's a personal choice that you're going to need to work through, yeah.
To that as well, I would just add, of course, that the Trust has a duty of care. We look at some of the proposed itineraries that come in and really kind of have to sit people down and go, that's just, you're not going to make it. So really err on the side of sensible, modest is whilst maintaining some aspiration, if that makes sense, because people, I think, can get very excited. It's pretty hard going.
So I would just add that you can hear from the Churchill people themselves there that they are very understanding of what's involved in the travel, and probably that we're our own worst enemies in a way because we want to cram everything in. But the Churchill Trust is very understanding, and if you've identified you already have some reason that you need to I think everybody should pace themselves, by the way. Everybody should be thinking about that during their travel. And like Lindsay was saying, allocating time for writing up and things like that. But if you've got some particular extra thing, then factor it in there and just explain it. And I think they'll be very empathetic.
Thank you. Next question's another really great question, really relevant, and it goes to the report that Churchill Fellows do after their return from travel. Lindsay and Anna, love to hear your thoughts on just what that's needed in terms of time and energy and headspace in order to be successful. How much time does it take? What do you need to factor in? What do people need to know at this point when they're considering applying for a fellowship? Lindsay, maybe we kick it off with you.
Yeah, it's not a quick task, and it will vary depending, of course, on where you're going, how much you're learning, how much you've got to contribute. If you have a look on the Churchill website and go through some of the reports, there's some really extensive reports in there which would have taken quite some time to put together, and some less so bulky reports as well. So it's going to be variable to your project, the amount of information you've got to go through. Like any proper structured professional type body of work, you'll go through a number of iterations of it as well. So you will write it, you will change it, you'll edit it, and it will take some time. So allocation of time is a good thing, but you just, again, need to be focused and allocate that time to actually doing it. It will go through, as I say, a number of iterations as you go throughout the process, but there is a lot of guidance too on the Churchill website about how to write your report and the structure that's required.
Yeah, I would agree. It takes a lot of time. So maybe pick a time and multiply it by 3 maybe or something. But it comes at a time, writing the report comes at a time when you've just got back from your travels and you're trying to just settle back into your normal life. So you've got to factor that in as well. And I actually booked a week's leave whilst I was away to start writing at the end of my trip, to actually start writing my report before I got back into the, the busyness of work, which worked really, really well, but I still only got a small portion of it done. There are, it can be quite, there's a lot of information you need to express in a clear way, and it's quite tricky. For me, I had all the people I was visiting, they all wanted to see what I was writing about my visit as well. So, I was sending bits off here and there, and that got a bit complicated. But there seems to be 2 main ways of writing it. If you can write up your individual meetings and then do a summary, do an introduction, write up your meetings, and then a summary at the end of what it all means. Or then some people weave it all into one document and just sprinkle the interviews really in there. But I decided the first way was better for me, to easier just to write up the interviews and sandwich it between an introduction and a summary or an action plan at the end, really.
And I guess I would just add to that, the discipline of writing is conveying the information without sending us 700 pages. We do have some minimum standards, but truly it's not a PhD.
Thanks, CD. We've got time for one more. So I want to just perhaps hear from our 3 speakers on flexibility and the balancing of being flexible and adaptable while travelling, while also, operating within the framework of what a fellowship involves. So how much can you adapt your time to spend more time in a certain area if that's what an opportunity comes up, versus how much do you have to stick to a schedule? Christine, maybe you can kick us off, and then we can...
Well, Tom, I was going to say, let's hear from Anna and Lindsay, and then I'll probably run kind of the corporate lens over the top of it, because, we have some responsibilities. So, but I think let's hear from Anna and Lindsay, and then I'll kind of finish up. How's that sound?
Sounds good. Anna, let's kick off with you.
Well, I don't think I changed my route and my places I visited, but I did have a problem in that I wanted to visit sort of like a world expert that in one particular hospital, and they were the only people who hadn't responded to my request, or they'd responded in a sort of bit of an ambiguous way. And so I just had to, because this person was really important, very important in the area, and I didn't want to change my itinerary and not go to that. Well, I wasn't allowed to change my itinerary. So what I did is I lined up some alternative visits instead, so I could at least go to, this is in Stockholm, so I used to go to Stockholm, visit some other people, and if I happened to meet with this expert, then fine. And it actually turned out that in a similar way that we were moving hospitals, they were moving hospitals at the same time. So they were in a bit of chaos, and that's why he hadn't responded. And he did respond. So basically, as I was flying to Sweden, he'd responded and said, yep, come on down on Monday, and it all worked out okay. But I think you do need to have contingency plans, because no matter, I think most projects you might have the key people you want to speak to, but there's always this extra stuff that you might be able to find that would be interesting in another country. So be prepared to have a few of those up your sleeve if the main interview doesn't pan out.
When I was at this point now that everybody else is, when I was preparing for mine and listening to the information sessions, that even back then that was repeatedly said, be prepared, things change. You will get invited to something. You will meet somebody somewhere and they'll go, oh, you really need to come over to here and see what we're doing in this space. That happened. So in terms of developing my plan, my itinerary, I factored in that was probably going to happen in a few places. So I had that extra day in there so that I could move things around. And it gave me a little bit more flexibility, because it did happen. It really did happen. And the way I documented that in my plan is the admin side of it. So spending time to write the report, to make the notes, to get that all put together. So it's all, you know, all ongoing work as part of it, but I built that into my plan, so consider that.
Yeah, and I think those answers are actually kind of great framing, right? Because the reality is we as a trust have 100 people travelling at any one moment. It can't be a free-for-all. We can't manage that, and we can't afford that either. So it's kind of the balance between you've got a plan, you told us you were going to do that, and frankly, that's what you were assessed on. So if you wildly change it, then we're not having a lot of integrity in terms of the selection process. So we do walk a fine line. We try and be really flexible. I think most fellows would say that the team works very closely with you here. And look, there is provision while you're traveling. If some amazing opportunity drops in, you're like, you can fund it yourself. If you're in, France and someone in England becomes available, you can go and pay for that bit of the leg yourself. So look, it's, I guess I just call it a respectful balance, right? It just can't be a free for all. We don't want to lace you up in a straitjacket either. But, really, we do work through it with fellows pretty comfortably. We've been doing it for a long time. And we have got great staff, established processes, and really a lot of experience to draw on. And I guess last but not least from me, what we've been saying all through this thing is have a think about, is this the right moment for you? We hope this information session's been really useful to you, and maybe the use that is for you is that 2025 is not great, 2026 might be a better option. Like all of this information, we want you to take away and have a good hard think about, because we would love to hear from you. But hopefully we're contextualising it for you so you've got a real sense of what's involved.
Thanks, CD. Look, that brings us to time. That's the close of the session. Thank you to all our speakers for sharing your thoughts, your expertise, and thank you to everyone who's come along. We really appreciate your interest, and we'd love to see some amazing applications come in when they open on the 28th of February. You will see a recording come through to your email, and we'd also encourage you to keep in touch with the Trust by signing up to our emails or following us on social media channels. But that's a wrap from us, so good evening, and thanks again for your attendance. Bye-bye.